Welcome to my Boomer Buddies podcast, where we tell it like it was and is. Today, a great day. One of my core Boomer Buddies, Dan Vikstrom. We've known each other for quite a while. We met in college. We played baseball together. In fact, that's how we met. I was a grade older than him, a sophomore. He was a freshman. It was fall baseball, as I remember. Dan, welcome to the show. Glad you are here.
Thanks, Rick. It's good to be here.
Just so they get to know us a little bit, how we interact. We give each other the business quite a bit. We trust each other. We've known each other forever. First time we met, a little shaky on your part, wouldn't you say? What do you remember about the first time we met?
Well, I think, are you talking about the 100-yard dash race?
To finish off practice, we went to the football field and lined up. We had to pair up with somebody. And I saw this guy with wire glasses crooked on his face with a little Brillo head hairdo. And I thought, oh, this is an easy mark. We'll just do a quick sprint and hit the showers. Is that how you remember it?
Yeah, it was the fall of '76. So Brillo head hair are kind of in. There were a lot of those around then, and so you kind of grabbed me, said, "Okay, let's go," and the guy in the far end zone was doing the starting, and of course he'd raise his arm and drop it, and of course you took off early, and that kind of pissed me off. I said, "Hey, where are you going? Hey." I passed you up because I had the longer legs and more top end speed, and you kind of looked like, I can't believe it. He's running by me, and so anyway,
I just took a liberty. I thought, oh, I'll have an easy sprint then. So I think maybe I started while the arm was still a little bit more upright than it should have been. But anyway, our friendship blossomed from there. We played baseball together, like we just mentioned. We joined the same fraternity. After we graduated from the University of Minnesota Morris, we actually worked together at an advertising company, billboard company. And ended up, I was your boss. And what I am eternally grateful for, Dan, is you didn't tell me to piss off until after 5 o'clock every day. But we've remained friends. We've raised our kids, and here we are all these years later.
Yep.
I do want to say, Dan, and to the public out there that's listening and watching, he's a great historian. He's got a great mind for history. He's a Stonesologist. He knows everything about the Rolling Stones. He also likes World War II. Professor Driggs from the history department at UMM, he would say to open the class, what would you like to talk about today?
Being that it was Pearl Harbor Day a few days ago, I don't know if I want to necessarily talk about Pearl Harbor, but maybe just the somewhat kind of the year following that. Everybody has the idea that the Battle of Midway in June of 1942 kind of turned the war towards the Americans, but in actuality, what it did kind of do is stop the Japanese momentum. But the U.S. Navy was still suffering losses and losing naval battles after the Battle of Midway down in the area of the Guadalcanal campaign. And it was a close run thing all through 1942 and into 1943 till the industrial might of the United States started producing all of the hundreds of warships and thousands, tens of thousands of airplanes that would eventually build into probably the greatest military force ever seen on the planet as far as size and force. But 42 was a close run thing. The U.S. Navy was fighting for its life.
Just think of the effort and the sacrifices that everyone in the U.S. had to make to be able to build up, to have to build up rationing. Civilians had to go into the factories and work. They had to make sure that they gave up all rubber products, metal, scrap metal. They had to turn all that in for the war effort. It was quite a amazing feat to mobilize the country like that.
Yeah. Particularly remember that rubber was in shortage. That's right. And but No, the people who had it tough really obviously were the soldiers, the sailors and soldiers. And you know, hundreds of thousands of them, I suppose, went and enlisted after Pearl Harbor.
The European theater got a lot of attention, but over in the Pacific theater, you had the Army, you had the Marines, you had Coast Guard forces, right? Navy. They all had to come together and figure out how to defeat this dug in Japanese force. And nothing was easy about that, was it?
No, because in many cases, particularly down by the Solomon Islands, the Japanese had the preponderance of naval forces, and everything dependent on the Pacific Ocean being such a vast expanse of water with small islands, that everything depended on being able to control the seas. And so there are some real punch outs at sea between the U.S. Navy and the Imperial Japanese Navy. Um, and the Guadalcanal campaign, which kicked off in August of 1942 down in the Solomon Islands, in my opinion, was really the turning point of the war. And that entailed the U.S. Navy being able to control an airfield that they had captured on Guadalcanal and keep it out of the hands of the Japanese. So the Navy could actually have a land-based airfield there. A lot of the story is the control of the waters over around there and the fighting between the naval battles and everything. And I'm not an expert on it. I was very interested in it as a kid prior to teenager and so forth, and did a lot of reading then. And my interest in it has been rekindled lately because of this podcast, which is really great, called Unauthorized History of the Pacific War. It's currently in its third season, and they had, start kind of at the beginning, obviously, kind of chronologically related, and they're great storytellers. There's a couple of professional historians that are on there. One is basically the host or moderator who moves this conversation along, and then a guest they have frequently is another historian who's written books and whose specialty is the Pacific War. The other host is a retired Navy submarine captain who is just does a great job relating his naval experience to events that happened going on, well, over 80 years now ago. So anyway, I've really enjoyed it. There's a lot of they relate a lot of personal stories of individual soldiers and their bravery. The Marines were highly involved with the campaigns, but the Army also was with these island campaigns, including Guadalcanal. And it was an example of a pretty good example of them working together, the two
Yep.
branches, which is definitely not always the case. And then it also they're very honest about mistakes that were made by commanding generals and admirals, and very honest in their opinions about whether they failed or not in their duties, as far as costing more lives or personality wise not being able to work with their significant counterparts. And so in that sense it's really good because they don't sugarcoat everything, um, and it does show you how difficult things were out there.
Yep.
And you remember the U.S. was fighting a two front war, obviously in Europe also. Just to give you an idea of how the American industrial behemoth that by 1943 and into and through 1943 was producing all these ships and all these
Mm.
thousands of airplanes. Um, on D-Day in Europe, June 6th, Operation Overlord, you had I don't know the exact numbers, but it was a 20-mile stretch of English Channel that they had to cross with 500,000 troops. 9 days later, they also kicked off a campaign in the Pacific to take Saipan in the Marianas Islands. Started from Pearl Harbor, over 500 ships taking part and 70,000 troops going 3,200 miles across the expanse of the Pacific Ocean to invade these islands in the Mariana Islands, Saipan and Guam and Tinian. And comparing that to going across a 20-mile expanse of the English Channel, it's quite the feat, which I think we could never do again. We're not capable industrially of doing anything like that anymore. Um, we have we do not have the shipbuilding capacity to do it. Maybe not even the manpower to do it that we would need. So it's something that will probably never be repeated again. At that point, with the invasion of, it's called Operation Forager, that invasion entailed 15 aircraft carriers and numerous battleships, both new fast battleships and older ones, which would be used for shore bombardment, because they were too slow to be able to keep up with the fast carrier task forces. But they made good use of them by employing them for shore bombardment at these invasion sites.
Like Saipan.
Yep, like Saipan, and
Mm.
later, Iwo Jima, um, Okinawa, and so forth. The breadth of the operation was amazing, and just individual stories of heroism are really inspiring too. And it's just been fascinating for me to kind of learn new things, obviously, and get back to my interest in history.
I want to thank you, Dan, because the unauthorized history of the Pacific War, I've watched a couple episodes myself, and those guys, you're right, they don't sugarcoat it. They talk about the leaders. They had nicknames, and sometimes the nicknames were well earned, and they point that out, putting people's lives at risk. And then also leaders that did some great things too. So, yeah, I found it very interesting, and I thank you because I'm going to keep watching as it's an interest of mine as well. One of the things that they talked about in the Saipan episode is basically jumping around island to island. They were making slow progress, right? And at the rate they were going, it would have taken forever to achieve the goals. So, Dan, the Pacific Theater, like you mentioned, a week after D Day in Europe, they're doing this major assault and a lot of coastline to cover. I know they had to send frogmen in to recon the coral beaches and the best places to land, the craft that come in, and the tanks, they had to get them in without them getting swamped. What planning they had to do, such a huge level, but you just don't hear about it like you do the European theater. At least that's in my mind the way it is.
You're right, because the European theater took priority. It was prioritized. So Pacific Theater, they may not get the planes they need, or enough of them, or they may get a older model, P-40, instead of the newer, something newer. And particularly in 42 and going into 43 and into 43, the lack of warfighting material was an issue. But you spoke about the frogmen and UDTs, underwater demolition teams, were basically developed. Now, the Italians had kind of pioneered this, and they actually had compressed air or aqua lungs. They kind of started using those, but these Americans were swimming with snorkels. So they weren't under. I mean, they would have to stay near the surface, and they would have to. One of the invasions they did, and this was the invasion of the Tarawa Atoll, which was extremely bloody in mid 1943. The planners had misjudged the depth of the water over the reefs, and they did not know how deep the water was, and consequently, a lot of the landing craft would hang up far out from the beach, and the Marines would have to get out and wade through in broad daylight, while the Japanese, who are embedded into defensive positions, they would have to come in 300, 400, 600 yards of beach waiting
Mm.
while the Japanese were shooting them, and it was a bloodbath. That invasion of Bishu Island, which was one of the which is the main landing island at Tarawa Atoll. And so they learned lessons from that, and started developing these UDTs. They were frogmen, and basically that has all evolved into what would be considered the Navy SEALs today.
Mhm.
So they were learning on the fly, and that learning entailed the loss of thousands of Marines. I think just on that first day at Tarawa, they lost something like 1,300 Marines
Mm.
killed, and so a total bloodbath and mess up as far as the planning of that assault, um, and so very very sad in that so many fell because of the bad preparation. They did end up winning the battle, but it cost the Marines dearly. That sacrifice now is part of their lore. We shouldn't forget the sacrifice that these men did for the country, and it's a shame nowadays that um, people aren't aware of all the sacrifice. Just take the freedoms we have for granted, and that's kind of my interest in that. We're the children of what is widely called the greatest generation, and my uncles, three uncles on my mom's side of the family, all served in the war, and one of them actually did serve in the Pacific campaign. I believe he was with the Navy, and he was one of the he was on some kind of landing craft, and there are various kinds. You have the floating tracked vehicles, which are designed to, you know, go through the water and then hit the beach, climb up over the reefs, get to the other side, and continue and land up on the beach. What he was operating, I never knew. Kind of a regret to me. And he never talked about it to his family, to his kids. But it affected him because he had to spend upwards of a year in hospital and at the end of the war out on the West Coast.
Mm.
Uh, the strength and the ability to get things done against the odds, not only the Marines, but the Army, the units, the Air Corps, the naval forces supporting everything is really quite the story. Better than any fictional war
Or
story.
the Seabees too, maintaining those airfields and the engineering that had to happen with floating docks and things like that. Well,
Yep.
you talked about the greatest generation. Just think, they were raised during the Great Depression, right? So from their childhood, they never had it easy. They had to fight and scrounge and find ways to get things done. And it served them well during the war to pull together and figure out how to get it done. There was a resolve that I don't think we see nowadays. Um, civics isn't really taught anymore in schools, and it's very apparent. Hear some of these interviews, and we're a couple of boomers. We're children of those the greatest generation. And maybe we're partially at fault. I don't like to coddle my kids, but there's a lot of kids that were coddled. And I don't mean this to necessarily be an opinion show. It's a show with a couple of boomers sharing their perspectives while I'm sharing mine right now. I just am so appreciative of the generation that came before us. We did our best, but we did not go through what they did.
That's right. They, we grew up in a different time, post war. The baby boom generation is generally considered from 1946 through 1964.
Yep.
And why did that happen? It's because all these hundreds of thousands of soldiers who came home on or operations like Operation Magic Carpet, which was basically the warships bringing the soldiers home. Okay, they get back, and all of a sudden, they marry their girlfriends and they start having babies. The United States dominated the economy of the world because a large portion of the economy of the world had been destroyed. It was leveled, it was rubble. So the United States basically became a superpower, um, and was a world superpower by the end of the war. So we did not have the economic competition that we do now. That allowed American industry to just keep on chugging along. It had been rolling along by manufacturing all the war material needed to prosecute the war, and now you had all this industrial capacity, which started getting transferred into making consumer items, washing machines, dryers, refrigerators. Uh, Automobile industry started kicking back into gear again. That had largely been redirected towards war industry, and
Yep.
so it was an economy that one man going out, your average man could have an income that you could afford to buy a home. And culturally, we were different. Women who wanted to stay home to raise their children that we were having by the bushelful. That's why they called it the baby boom. We're able to do that on one income. Largely now, it's harder to do for a larger portion of our population. The middle class has shrunk down over the years, so now I think it used to be in the 60% range, 60 to 70% considered middle class. Now I think it's you know barely 50%, if that. But anyway, kind of digressing a little, but it kind of does illustrate the differences between the generations and the opportunities that we were afforded by our parents' generation.
Yeah. They just wanted our lives to be better than theirs was. They were able to work hard, like you said. The GI Bill, they had all these track homes, neighborhoods formed. All the baby boomer kids hung out together, played outside, came home when the street light came on. Uh, the pop culture exploded under us. The music exploded. It differed from our parents, absolutely. All in all, we are thankful to that generation for giving us the lives that we had. And part of this podcast mission is to talk about the lives that we had because of what the greatest generation did. We had it pretty good overall. It wasn't perfect or easy, but guess what? A lot of great things happened. Dan, I enjoyed talking history with you. And I think when we come back, maybe you can join one of the other baby boomer buddies and we can talk about music. I want to talk to you about the Stones. That's a big point of interest for you. You're the go to guy for that. And I just appreciate you coming on today. If you have any final thoughts, if you want to sum up your thoughts on the war, uh, now's a good time to do it.
I guess I'd just say it was good to be with you, and I'm down here in Texas, and we've got a nice day outside today, so we're gonna go hit the sunshine a little bit and enjoy the day. You stay nice and warm and cozy up in Minnesota there.
Yeah, it's snowing today, Dan. but it's melting right away. We've had a pretty moderate winter so far. And again, I thank you for coming on, Dan. I appreciate you more than you know. Enjoy the life down there, the winter life down there. You do live in Wisconsin during the summer months. I want to point that out. And you were raised in suburban Minneapolis. So,
Yeah. Yep. Well, yeah. And I've told you before, you're welcome to come on down. We'll play some golf.
all right, we'll go lose some golf balls together.
Okay.
For Dan Vikstrom, I'm Rick Reed. Thanks for tuning in to my Boomer Buddies podcast. Until next time, we'll see you around the block. Hey, if you want to listen to and see more episodes of my Boomer Buddies podcast, check us out on YouTube and make sure you subscribe. And also listen to us on Spotify, Google, Buzzsprout, and other podcast locations. Thanks again. Till next time.